the man that I'm going to introduce you this evening will restore America. Congressman Ron Paul.
Keep you all away. Thank you for coming. Nice introduction, and I want to introduce my wife and a granddaughter, Linda. It's great to see such a wonderful crowd. We've had a couple town hall meetings, and guess what? The turnout has been good. There's a lot of enthusiasm for the cause of liberty. Isn't it? To teach a lesson to those people who are ignoring Maine and reward the people who come to talk to you. The election is coming up soon, and we hope to do very well. And if today had if there was any response to what it's going to be like, we're going to do real well, and I appreciate very much the support. Once in a while, the media will challenge me. They say, well, you're not in this to win. I said, well, what am I doing it for? They say, oh, you're just doing this to promote a cause, and you're interested in the message, and you're interested in the Constitution. Well, isn't that a good reason to win, too? They get confused is they don't run into too many people who are running for office and actually believe in something. So, I know you do, or you wouldn't be here, and that encourages me. And let me tell you, I need all the encouragement. I'll tell you what, this country needs the encouragement. The freedom movement is building and growing by leaps and bounds. Let me tell you, there's a lot of good things. Amen. I give a lot of credit to the young people. Go to college campuses and we get good turnout. There's a lot of young people here. There's a few in this room, one or two at least, that are over 30, but we include everybody. We're very inclusive because anybody who believes in liberty has to have a young spirit. And that's what we welcome, and that is the spirit of liberty is young. And literally it is. Liberty is something that hasn't been around a long time. If you look at all of recorded history, and if you look at all the world today, how many countries really enjoy true liberty? Not very many. Most of history. Some people estimated maybe 97% of the people who ever lived had to live under tyranny. And just think of what's happening to our country now. I'm scared to death. We're slipping and sliding right into a tyrannical state where we don't have control of our lives. We don't have control of our economy. We don't have control of our money. So this is a real struggle for us to maintain something that was given to us. And the efforts are indeed necessary. But the encouragement is there. The numbers are absolutely growing, and we have been able to get around some of the times when those who are in the media tend to ignore or distort or a few other minor things like that. Because, a true message is spread by word of mouth, and the word of mouth is very easy to spread these days with something called the internet. We have wonderful tools that weren't available in the past, and a lot of people ask me, why do you think there's such enthusiasm now versus 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago? And when I got interested and thought I was able to put this philosophy together and really understand what America was all about and how important individual liberty is, there weren't that many people talking about it because our country was so wealthy and they didn't have to worry. I think what happened to us is we lived in a country that had maximum amount of freedom freedom creates a maximum amount of prosperity, and then people concentrate on the prosperity and they become more materialistic, so they're looking for the government to readjust and redistribute, and they're concerned about it, and they get benefits by manipulating the system. The special interest comes in, there's the bleeding hearts, well motivated, say, well, this is a wealthy country, we have to give people this, and give this, and then others take advantage of it, and they manipulate it for their benefits. And that worked for a long time, and it took a long time to undermine the system. I think what has happened in the last 4 or 5 years is the country has come to realize that the system has been undermined. We aren't the producers we used to be. We don't have a sound currency like we should have. We're fighting way too many wars that we should have stopped. Basic problems that we've had over these years is we have lost the understanding of how important individual liberty really is. And to me, and Jefferson talked about in the Declaration of Independence, it's individual liberty, and it's a God-given liberty. We're endowed with it. It doesn't come from our government. But I think we very often have lost this because we said the government will take care of us. Nobody, like tonight I was on a TV interview and they asked me something about, well, Obama's now preparing this thing to pay for the education because education is getting to be a problem. Well intended, but where's Obama going to get the money? He doesn't have any money. The government doesn't have any money. And I made a suggestion. I think it's a neat suggestion when people press you, well, you don't care about people. Well, okay, he was wondering how we're going to pay for the cost of college education. And the government's going to do it. Well, where's it going? Maybe the government's going to take it away from somebody who doesn't get to go to college. And they might have to pay for it through inflation. It's invisible, it's deceitful, they just print the money. And the person that is struggling, that doesn't get the benefits, it isn't rich people that's going to end up paying for it. They know how to work the system. You know, so all these good intentions aren't that good. But we have to realize what it means. And that is self-ownership, ownership of our own lives. We should have a right to our life and our liberty. We should have a right to the property we earn and take care of. And that means, under those circumstances, if we got to keep the fruits of our labor, you know, we would be like the founders. We would argue the case that we don't really need an income tax under those circumstances. Assumptions that are made to undermine this whole concept of who owns us and who owns our property. One is the income tax. The income tax was started when it was very, very low percentage and only a few people paid it. But the principle was 100%. The principle was the government has the power to say that they own all your income and permit you to keep a certain percentage. And then there's always conditions. But that is the assumption made with the income tax. What about the inheritance tax? This is another one. A person will work, they have a business, and they have a farm or whatever, and they want to pass it on to the next generation. And then all of a sudden, the individual passes away, they're getting ready to pass it on, so you have to go to the government and find out which part of your family can keep. That undermines the principle of capital. At the same time, it fortifies this idea that the government owns the property. And another example of this that we have lost is the fact that can you use your land without permits anymore? Yeah. How many permits do you have to get? And that's, you know, not only is it local and county and state and federal, they even want the UN involved in doing this. We don't need that either. So it is this principle of where our rights and our lives come from. And if we really knew and understood this, and then understood that is the society that produces the most, and if we assume responsibility for ourselves, you know, it would be a much better world. But today, we have lost our way. Today, we have accepted the notion that the entitlement system defines rights. People say, well, I'm entitled to free education, I'm entitled to food stamps, I'm entitled to a house, and this has become a right. Entitlement sounds pretty good, but we cannot let them change the definition of them. An entitlement is not a right. You're not entitled to somebody else's rights or somebody else's property, because that is what undermines the entire system. face a financial crisis because of this. The productivity is down, the middle class is shrinking, jobs have gone overseas, the currency is losing value, and we are being very much challenged. I first got interested in running for office in the early 1970s when the last link of our currency to gold was eliminated. Believing then that this was a serious, dangerous move, and if you look at any chart, any economic chart from 1971 on, the change in debt and spending and size of government, the wars we fight, it's going up exponentially. And the reason is that politicians don't have to be responsible, but generally they have been rewarded. I mean, just think how many decades, up until just a few years ago, almost every incumbent always got reelected, and his job was to return, the largesse, bring something back to the district. And because we were wealthy, they were able to get away with it. It's not working anymore, and right now we have to face up to the fact that we are a poorer country, and the wealth that we have, which is the apparent wealth on the surface, is all based on debt, and our government is based on debt. We want a currency account deficit, which means we borrow more money than we spend than we're able to sell overseas. Every year, $1 trillion. We owe over $3 trillion overseas, a bunch of it to Japan and China, and our national debt is $16 trillion. It can be raised now without even Congress participating. This last go-around, Congress had no say in it because Congress gave the authority to the president last summer because they just threw up their hands. They say, "Oh, we can't get this stuff passed. We certainly don't want to cut anything." So they just allow the debt to keep going up. But I think what's happening now, though, is American people are realizing it doesn't take, a PhD. Matter of fact, a PhD in conventional economics would probably confuse you more than it would help you. So it's obvious that even with a little calculator, with a little common sense, most people are starting to realize that this system is not viable. We can't continue it. And this is the reason I'm saying that if we're serious about it, we got to cut spending. Right. I think that's what we should do. Right. Unfortunately, and people in Washington and the other candidates have not offered any cuts. Oh, you might have heard that they tried last summer and they couldn't do it, so they deferred to the super committee. The super committee has made a super mess of the whole thing. And they couldn't do anything, so there was an automatic cut of $1.2 trillion. That sounds like a lot of money. It used to be a lot of money, but if you're planning to increase the spending by $9 trillion over the next 10 years automatically, cutting $1 trillion from the automatic increases isn't a cut. You're increasing the debt by $8 trillion instead of $9 trillion. And that's about $100 billion a year of the proposed increases. We're running up an increase in our national debt every month by $100 billion. So the arithmetic is there. It cannot be sustained. So I have a very strong suggestion. I want to cut $1 trillion the first year. There is that you do know that if we start cutting, somebody's going to, you can't cut this, you can't cut that, everybody has to be taken care of. We'd rather gamble on runaway inflation and complete collapse than we would be willing to cut anything. But I believe very sincerely, both economically, politically, and all that, the place to start cutting is overseas. Why shouldn't that be the easiest place to cut? We're spending... empire overseas, we're spending well over $1 trillion every year. That's different than the DoD budget. And besides, the defense budget I don't consider the same as the military budget. We spend a lot on military, but we don't spend enough on defense because we're defending everybody else and we're forgetting about our own country here at home. there's no reason, there's no constitutional authority and no logical reason for us to assume the role of being the policeman for every little fight and every little conflict and every little revolution. Some of those fights have been going on for 1,000 years. And we want to send more of our young people over there and have more killed and more coming home with severe injuries, more coming home with post-traumatic stress syndrome. We have a serious problem, and we're broke. $4 trillion of our debt increase in these last 10 years came from overseas spending. So my suggestion is very simple. Let's have a pro-American defense policy. That means that we bring our troops home and stop the wars. From all over. Why are we still in Japan? This actually is an indirect subsidies in Okinawa, where the troops are stationed. They're begging and pleading for us to leave. So I would say it's time to leave. We don't have the money. They don't want us there, and we don't need troops in Okinawa. Why do we have troops there for? Just a month ago, Obama sent a couple thousand Marines into Australia. I mean, why do we have to invade Australia? I mean, we don't need these troops over there. I mean, we brag about, our weaponry. And that's one thing that we shouldn't worry about as Americans. We have the strongest military ever in the history of the world. We spend more than everybody else put together. We have modern equipment that nobody would dare attack us. Nobody's going to invade us. And we have a very capable military force. And yet, we're keeping troops like it's still World War II, building vessels that could be knocked out of the water with a missile from the sky. And we can hit any spot in the world. Unfortunately, we're hitting too many spots in the world. We shouldn't be doing it. But we're capable, and we shouldn't act so frightened and intimidated that all we have to do is we can't cut anything. So we do need to cut. We need to end the war in Afghanistan. The war should really end in Iraq. It hasn't actually ended. We shouldn't be considering going to Syria. We shouldn't be considering bombing in Iran. It's just time to change our foreign policy. Tonight, and the question was, and they played a clip from the president who said that he wants to downsize and reduce the number of troops in the military. And I didn't give a concrete answer because I don't know where and when or which troops are going to be removed, because even my proposals, I don't just take the military and gut the military and take the troops out. So I hedged a little bit on that, but I said, he's talking about downsizing. But that's exactly what Rumsfeld's talked about. You remember when he says, we need a smaller elite military? And it didn't happen. Now, Obama's talking about this thing, a smaller and elite military. You know what we need is a smaller and elite foreign policy that we don't need so much military, and then it would probably work. We have to be everywhere. It's too often. There's too many unintended consequences. Too many times it costs a lot more and lasts a lot longer than they ever predict. And unfortunately, too often there's blowback from this. We have consequences that come back, and many people in this country are too much in denial about this. There is such a thing, and it's been well documented by private sources that do research on exactly why individuals would like to do us harm. Our DOD has done study, it verifies it. Our CIA has done studies, it verifies it. Even Paul Wolfowitz, who was the champion of these wars going over there, he said after 9/11, he says, you know what? He says, now 9/11 occurred, he says, maybe we ought to take That'll help a little bit. Maybe we ought to take the base out of Saudi Arabia. And because it was listed by Al-Qaeda that our base in Saudi Arabia offended their religious beliefs because we were on their holy land with military troops. And he conceded that, and they took the base out of Saudi Arabia. And still, they're in denial. They will not say that anything that we do motivates some of this hatred toward us. So we need to recognize that. I believe that we should think and challenge this idea that the only reason anybody wants to come and do us harm is because we're free and prosperous. That is not true. That is not true. They do not come or want to do us harm. There's a lot of other free countries and more prosperous countries than ours, and they're not threatened. But this, we have to have a designation on why we exist. We have to have a strong national defense. We have to have a strong policy. That's the federal obligation and the obligation of the president. But we should, for instance, worry a lot less about this border that you can't even identify, because I've been there and I've looked at this border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. It is so mountainous, it is undetermined, and nobody can define exactly what's going on there. So we spend all this money and troops and killing and bombing and things to do, and yet at the same time, we don't even deal with our borders south of us here. I mean, we just ignore it. I think we should deal with our borders and forget about their borders. In the last five years, there have been 47,500 individuals killed on the Mexican-U.S. border. That's how bad our borders are. That is probably not motivated by the illegal immigration problem. That needs to be dealt with, and we need more resources there, and we should enforce our laws. But most of the killing is done by drug gangs, and it's the drug war that's going on. So this is why I have been questioning. I want to get rid of all those needless, undeclared, unwinnable wars that were involved, but I don't think the war on drugs is a benefit to anybody right now. The modern-day war on drugs has been going on since the early 70s, and a couple $1 trillion, some estimate could be $3 trillion when you add up all the consequences of the drug war. But another consequence of the drug war is the undermining of our personal liberty. The operations, the SWAT team operations coming and saying, oh, there's drugs in that house. Somebody told us there's drugs in the house. Bust into the house. Sometimes the victims get killed and tear up the house and then not find any drugs. I mean, as a physician and as being involved in politics and thought this thing through the best I could, I think we should take people who are addicted to drugs and treat them more like patients like we do alcoholics. We'd be all a lot better off. War on drugs or wars overseas, it creates an atmosphere where people are more willing to give up their liberties. Certainly after 9/11, I can understand how people felt, because we all felt that way. But it isn't an excuse to give up our liberties. I am also very convinced that you never have to sacrifice any liberty to make you safer. I don't think you'll be safer. Shortly after the 9/11 episode, it wasn't too long, a week or two, the Patriot Act came to the House floor. And this was passed rather easily. It came late, 1 hour debate, 800 or 900 pages. Nobody could have read it. And I was sitting beside another member who was voting for it. Guess what? I voted against it, if you didn't know. I said, how come you're voting for for this. I know you couldn't have read it, and you don't know what's in it. And and actually, the bill had been around for several years. They used 9/11 as the reason, the opportunity for passing it. He said, "Well, I know that." He says, I don't read it." He says, "I know there's probably some bad stuff in there." He says, "But how can I go home to my district and tell them that I voted against the Patriot Act?" And I said, "Well, it's you'll have to go home and tell them the truth." I said, and he says, "Well, they won't understand." And I said, "But that's your job. Go home and explain it to them what you're voting for." The undermining of personal liberties continue, whether it's the war overseas or the drug war. Right now, it's this whole idea of surveillance. The Patriot Act has led to searches and looking at all our records, whether it's emails, telephone records, whatever, without a real search warrant. So if they had called that bill to repeal the Fourth Amendment Act, believe me, it wouldn't have gotten passed. But that's essentially what it did. I don't know if anybody's heard about the recent passage of the National Defense Authorization Act. I'm always impressed that people know about it. I tell you what, the communications are doing very well, and it's outside the mainstream media because it isn't on the news. Are they on the news explaining to you that the military now can arrest an American citizen and deny due process, denied an attorney, can be held indefinitely, arrested by the military? I mean, what have we undoing? Not only have we undoing our Constitution, but we're undoing the Magna Carta. So this is dangerous stuff, and it's easy to get it passed by, but I don't think they're quite passing this by without you noticing it, because everywhere I go, a lot of people know about this. But this is on top of the fact that a year ago, the president announced a different policy. That if there's a bad guy out there, at least we think he's a bad guy, we can't catch him anyway, and he might be overseas, we have a right to assassinate American citizens. That is on the books now, and al-Awlaki was assassinated. He was over in Yemen. He was never charged, never convicted of anything. He associated with some people who were bad people, and it sounded like he was promoting some violence, but similar cases have been tried and rejected at the Supreme Court. But regardless, the principle is no matter how bad a person is, Timothy McVeigh got a trial. The Nazi war criminals got a trial. I've been caught many years after World War II. He got a trial in Israel, and they met their fate. They were punished. But it's the principle of when the king, when the federal government, the executive branch, can start writing laws and enforcing laws without even a hearing, and bluntly saying, don't ask for an attorney. A senator said, don't ask for an attorney because you're not going to get one. This is very bad. There was one provision in the bill, in the Senate bill, that said that if you were captured or arrested and you were tried in a civilian court and you were found to be innocent, that you still could be held forever in a court, and they could throw the ruling out. But guess what? There was a senator from Kentucky that got that removed. Over the years, of course, I emphasize the Constitution so much. I emphasize the Constitution for foreign policy, what we're not permitted to do, and have a strong national defense. And also, never going to war unless the war is declared. We'd stay out of trouble if we just had people in Washington that actually, believed in the Constitution, read it, and understood it. We would save ourselves a lot of grief if we had only known. But our problem now is that we have been so careless with the Constitution, there's not much left to it. Whether it's the Fourth Amendment or the Fifth Amendment and these arrests that are going on and what they do in the name of fighting these wars, the effort that we have is a bit overwhelming. But we don't do it in a logical process. Take, for instance, education. The federal government's been involved in education probably about 50 years. I don't think they've done a very good job. I don't, matter of fact, I was there, I think in the late 70s when they voted for the Department of Education. I voted against that too. The important point that I want to make is if the people of the country say, well, education is not doing well, we have to redistribute the wealth and even up the education around the world, around the country, so therefore we want the federal government to be in charge. Well, if they wanted that, they should have amended the Constitution. But the fact that they just ignore the Constitution, whether it's the war issue, the education issue, or the medical issue, they just go and do it, so there's not a whole lot left to it. The monetary issue, something I've talked about, they ignore the monetary issue. The founders were very keen on trying to protect us against ourselves from destroying our currency because they had gone through the destruction of the continental dollar and they know what runaway inflation is all about. So they wrote in the Constitution, guess what? Only gold and silver is legal tender. That's right. And it's still on the books, but nobody cares. Matter of fact, if you use gold and silver as legal tender, even if you use an American silver dollar minted by the U.S. government, says it's legal tender for $1. If you use it, you'll go to jail. You know, but you have to use Federal Reserve notes because they want the monopoly power of issuing currency. So, but that is something that we were careless about, and I've talked about this. And also, I'm the individual, you might have heard about it. I'd like to not only audit the Federal Reserve, I'd like to get rid of it someday. Everything that I propose, I want transitions and work our way out of it before we end up with a calamity. And even in money, I say, well, we won't close them down in one day. We need the audit. But we ought to at least legalize competition, legalize the Constitution and allow us to use gold and silver. You'd have to change some laws, the legal tender laws and the tax laws, to allow people to compete. But one thing in order to do that, or when countries destroy their money, they eventually cannot restore confidence until they go back with something of real value, like gold and silver. That eventually will come, one way or the other. Already, the president of the World Bank has talked about using gold in an international standard. But that scares me because they want to do the reforms in the IMF and the World Bank. We don't need the World Bank and the IMF and the United Nations dealing with our monetary system. To have competition and know where we stand or go back to a sound currency, we ought to know if we have the gold. You know, the gold hasn't been audited for 60 years. And there's been so much trading going on and lending the gold out and having these swap arrangements. The truth is we really don't know. And I've tried for many, many years not only to get the Federal Reserve audited, but find out where the gold is and whether it really exists and who really owns the gold. And that has been done in top secret, and other countries have sold gold and made these agreements. And what has happened though with gold and sound money has been it's leaving the countries that are getting poorer in the West, like the United States and Europe. Guess what? The gold is going to the places who work hard, and we buy stuff and they have our money, and that's the Chinese and the Japanese. They end up, they're owning the gold. Indonesia buys gold, India buys gold, so it's going in the other direction. But it would be good if we even knew if the gold existed. But the good news is that there is a intellectual revolution going on, and it's alive and well not only across the country, but I have found out today especially it's alive and well in Maine. Tremendous confidence in a free society and individual liberty because it's based on something that permits people to run their lives as they choose. It doesn't mean that we dictate to each other how we run our personal lives, and it doesn't dictate to people how they should spend the money. Some people defend one half and not the other, but I think we should defend both. It's your life, and you should be able to use your life. If the government doesn't own your life, they don't own your money either. And that is what we should be working to protect. The one thing is it requires some tolerance, because some people might not do with their lives that you like, and you would like to instruct them. But some people don't spend their money the right way, but you shouldn't have a right to go and tell people, well, you should save more money doing this, and you should do this and that. There is a bit of tolerance in this, but people misconstrue that and say, well, you have too much tolerance. They're going to do things that are ugly and mean and nasty. Well, if they don't hurt people, if they only jeopardize themselves, that shouldn't be a big deal. I'd rather have the individual be in charge than the government and a bunch of bureaucrats. Yes. But the big thing to remember is, if you endorse the concept of freedom, you do not endorse the actions of freedom. You know, if you have freedom of religion, some people might practice religion that you don't like and you disagree with, but they still can do it. You don't endorse what they do. Some might endorse no religion whatsoever. So it's like that in lifestyles or religion or intellectual matters. It requires a fair amount of tolerance and recognize that you don't endorse what the people do. If we had more of that, I'll tell you what, I think we would have a much more peaceful and a much more prosperous society if we recognize the respect of other people. People who promote the use of force to promote our cause overseas, they say, well, this is American exceptionalism. We are an exceptional nation, we are great people, and we have all these wonderful values, and therefore we're going to spread them around the world. Well, guess what? When you try to spread this goodness around the world through a barrel of a gun and through bombs, you cancel out all the goodness that you're supposed to be spreading around. I don't believe in the exceptionalism of America. I think we've had great traditions and great examples. We have a great document and we have a great past, but we're losing it. Now, if we want to spread that message, we first have to practice it. I think if we practice it, set a good example, and let the rest of the world look at it and want to emulate us, and we do it through persuasion, that is altogether different than us using force and saying, marching armies around the world and saying, you will do it our way. We have two options. You do it our way, we'll give you money. If you don't do our way, then we'll bomb you and we'll remove you from your government. So I think the other option should be what the founders offered and suggested: friendship and trade with people. Even those individuals that might not be perfect, because we're not perfect. And of course, last night in the debates it came up, it's coming up more now. I think it's time that we get rid of this business of sanctions on Cuba. Why can't we talk to the Cuban people? Personally, a free society offers us a chance to work toward our own excellence and virtue. That should be our goal in our private life. Some would work harder at it than others, but that's the wonderful thing about a free society. But if you leave it to the government, where the government is supposed to make us more virtuous and more prosperous and pursue our efforts to be more excellent in the things we do, you give up your liberties. When the government does it, they can't do any of that without using force. And that is why freeing up people, freeing up the creativity of individuals. And the wonderful part about this is where production comes from. The freest societies have always been the most prosperous society. And we as conservatives and constitutionalists, I think we have lost this argument so long, because those who want to forcibly redistribute wealth and say, we care about people, we're going to give them free education and free this and that, they seem to grab the moral high ground. But history is on our side. I personally would rather live in a free society even if I would be poor. But we don't even have to deal with that. The freer the society is, the richer we are, the bigger the middle class, and the better the distribution. We shouldn't ever lose that argument, because we're on the right side of that. We truly are the humanitarians if you want to care for a lot of people. Just look at the extremes of big government and socialism. I mean, it leads to tragedy. If anything else, in the 20th century, it proved that socialism fails, especially the extreme efforts of communism. Total failure. failure. But right now, we're about to prove that the interventionism, the planning, and the Federal Reserve System running the economy, we're about to prove that system doesn't work either. But we can't allow them to place that game and place the blame on freedom and free markets, because we don't have freedom and free markets and sound money. It's a consequence of special interest government. In a government that debases its currency, destroys its currency, inevitably the middle class is undermined, the middle class it shrinks, and the wealth is transferred to a smaller group and into the wealthy group. And that is what's happening. But a lot of people think, oh, that's the defect of free markets. It isn't. There's a big difference between somebody becoming rich because we buy their product because the price is right and it's a good product and we reward them. Making money honestly like that should be rewarded. But when people get rich because they belong to the military-industrial complex or the medical-industrial complex or the media-industrial complex or whatever, or they get the bailouts from government, that is a different story. That's what we have. John Adams warned us early on that, although the Constitution gives us a republic, the most dangerous thing could happen if we could slip into a democracy, the dictatorship of a majority. And we're there. I don't believe we have a true republic, and I think our liberties are undermined. I think that we have every reason in the world to be optimistic that we can turn this around because we have so much enthusiasm with a remnant that's been around hoping and wishing that people would wake up, as well as the young people right now that are joining this effort. But John Adams said that what happens when you get into a true democracy, what generally happens, it wastes, it exhausts, and then it finally murders itself. And he used that word, it murders itself. And I keep thinking of those words. It's almost like we're murdering ourselves. I feel much more threatened by our own government wanting to arrest us, by the military, or getting rid of our Fifth and Fourth Amendments and our First Amendment rights. That's where I feel more threatened. And our oath of office even says, defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Concerned as I am, and as much as I talk about our problems, actually I'm pretty optimistic about what's happening in the country. I'm optimistic because so many people who knew about and understood but just didn't have many places to go. I've talked to so many people. I haven't voted in 30 years or 20 years. I'm just discussing with them. They're starting to see that there is some serious thinking about a true republic. And the young people, they really encourage me. They claim I encourage them, but they encourage me as well because they're enthusiastic and studying the Federal Reserve and doing all the things necessary. So there's every reason to be optimistic. And it's sort of like in medicine. If somebody is truly addicted to a drug, they never get better until they hit the bottom, they make a decision, they know what has to be done, and they make up their mind, they seek help, and they can get over it. And I think society might be like that too. But I think we're just about at the bottom now. And people are deciding that we better do something else. We just can't depend on the government. Why don't we depend on the principles of liberty? Let's restore the greatness of America by truly understanding what liberty is all about. And let's keep the revolution going. Thank you very much.
And your enthusiasm for just one moment. If you look around the room, I think we would agree that we have a packed house. That being the case, the congressman, whenever he comes to an event, he wants to take as much time as he possibly can to greet people individually and to get photos. We're going to do that tonight. Now, we're going to do